Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Before we get started today, if you're enjoying these deep dives, do us a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you get notified every time a new deep dive drops. All right, let's jump in. Picture this. A criminal commits a crime and vanishes, poof, across borders. How in the world do you even begin to track them down?
Like something out of a movie, right?
Exactly. Well, that's precisely what we're diving into today. The real-life organization that tackles this very challenge. Interpol.
Interpol, shrouded in mystery, intrigue.
And often, let's be honest, totally misrepresented in those movies. So whether you're prepping for the UPSC, hitting the books in school or college, or just someone who likes to stay informed, understanding how global crime fighting actually works is pretty important in our world today. And to help us navigate this maze, we have our expert on the subject.
Happy to be here.
Glad to have you. Okay, so first things first. What exactly is Interpol? What's the reality behind the Hollywood facade?
Well, Interpol, which stands for the International Criminal Police Organization, is basically a giant network. It's a platform that connects police forces from 194 member countries. And here's the key thing. Interpol itself doesn't have agents out there making arrests. It's all about facilitating cooperation between countries, helping them share information, coordinate investigations, and combat crimes that, don't stop at borders.
So less James Bond, more global information hub. Got it. But with 194 countries involved, how does this actually work in practice? It's a lot of moving parts.
You're telling me, imagine this, you're a police officer here in India on a case that leads you to a suspect who skipped town, let's say they're hiding out in France. Instead of hitting a dead end at the border, you have this direct line of communication through what's called a National Central Bureau, or NCB.
Okay, an NCB.
Right, and every member country has its own NCB, which acts as the main point of contact with Interpol.
So each country has its own little Interpol branch, essentially.
Exactly. And for our listeners in India, this is particularly relevant. India's NCB is actually managed by the CBI, the Central Bureau of Investigation.
So in that example, the Indian police would go through their NCB, which would connect them with the French NCB and Interpol HQ. Smooth.
Precisely. No more dead ends.
Okay, so we have this network, these local branches, but how do they actually share information and, take action? What are the tools of the trade, so to speak?
One of the most powerful tools, and the one that probably gets the most attention, is the system of color-coded notices. Each notice has a specific purpose, alerting member countries to different situations related to crimes and criminals.
Like a global alert system. I've definitely heard of those. What are some of the most important ones our listeners should know about?
Well, the most famous one is probably the red notice, which a lot of people think of as like an international arrest warrant.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So if someone pulls off a serious crime here in India and flees to another country, Interpol issues a red notice and boom, they're arrested. Right?
It's not quite that automatic. A red notice is more like a request for the location and provisional arrest of a wanted person, with the goal of extradition. It alerts all member countries to be on the lookout for that individual. But the actual arrest, the extradition, that all depends on the laws of the country where that person is found.
Right, because Interpol doesn't have the power to force any country to arrest someone.
Exactly. It's a vital point. International law is incredibly complex. So a red notice is a powerful tool, but it's not a guarantee of an immediate arrest. Each country still has its own legal processes to follow.
So it's more of a heads up or request for cooperation. What about other notices? Are there any that stand out?
Definitely. There's a whole range of them, each with a specific function. For instance, you have the yellow notice, which is all about locating missing persons. It's especially important in cases of, say, human trafficking or child abduction.
So very relevant in today's world, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And then there's the purple notice, which is one I find really interesting. This one isn't about specific individuals, but rather about sharing information on criminal methods, their modus operandi. It's like a heads up about new criminal techniques.
So if criminals in one country figure out a new way to, let's say, hack into bank accounts, Interpol can issue a purple notice and share that info with police forces globally. Smart.
Exactly. It's all about helping law enforcement stay ahead of those evolving criminal trends. Criminals are always innovating, so police forces need to share information and, innovate as well to stay one step ahead.
It's like a global crime-fighting think tank, in a way.
Huh.
This is really starting to paint a clear picture of how Interpol functions. It's not about a single all-powerful force, but about connecting the dots, sharing intelligence, and facilitating collaboration between countries.
And that's what makes Interpol so crucial, especially today. As our world becomes more interconnected, criminals become more sophisticated, more transnational. Interpol acts as a counterbalance, making it harder for them to exploit those global connections.
It's fascinating stuff. And it's not just about traditional crime fighting, right?
Yeah.
Interpol also plays a role in tackling things like terrorism and increasingly cybercrime. But we'll dive into those areas a little later.
Before we move on, I think it's really important to emphasize that the real power of Interpol lies in its ability to kind of foster trust, build bridges between all these law enforcement agencies, from all these different cultures, different legal systems.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's not just about sharing data. It's about creating this like shared understanding of the threats we face and a common purpose, in tackling them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that in today's world, you can't really fight crime effectively, especially the kind that crosses borders without this global network. This network allows for seamless exchange of intelligence, pursuit of fugitives, and the disruption of criminal networks that operate in multiple countries.
Right. And this brings us to an area where Interpol's impact is pretty undeniable. I think the fight against organized crime.
Organized crime.
Yes.
We're talking about these large-scale operations, drug trafficking, human trafficking, arms, smuggling, the very activities that fuel instability and conflict all around the world.
Exactly. These aren't just lone wolves operating in the shadows. We're talking about sophisticated networks with tons of resources and a real knack for exploiting weaknesses in the global system. So how does Interpol even begin to tackle something so entrenched, so powerful?
Well, one of their key strategies is the formation of these joint task forces. These task forces bring together specialists from different countries, often from different law enforcement agencies, to pool their expertise, their resources, and focus on specific operations targeting these criminal networks.
It's like assembling this dream team of investigators, each bringing their unique skills and knowledge to the table to take down a specific criminal group or activity.
That's a great way to put it. These task forces are incredibly effective because they allow countries to share intelligence coordinate actions across borders and ultimately present a united front against these transnational criminal organizations.
It makes me think of those big international drug busts you see in the news where multiple countries work together to seize huge shipments of narcotics or dismantle entire trafficking rings. Those must be the result of these kinds of efforts, right?
Absolutely. Those kinds of operations are often the culmination of months or even years of meticulous work by Interpol and its partners. They involve undercover operations, surveillance, cutting-edge forensic techniques. It's complex, demanding work, but the impact is undeniable.
This is all super fascinating, but I think our listeners would love to hear about a real-life case that really highlights Interpol's impact, something that resonates with India or reflects current events.
Okay, how about Operation Vax? Interpol launched this in 2021 to combat the rise of organized crime groups targeting COVID-19 vaccines.
Oh, wow. That's incredibly relevant. I remember hearing about those scams, fake vaccines being sold online. It was a pretty scary time.
It was a huge concern. As countries were trying to secure and distribute vaccines, criminal networks saw an opportunity. They were selling counterfeit vaccines, stealing legitimate doses, running phishing scams, preying on people desperate for protection from the virus.
So how did Interpol address this?
Operation Vax was a massive coordinated effort involving law enforcement from over 190 countries. The mission was clear: disrupt these criminal networks, seize counterfeit vaccines, and protect public health from these dangerous scams.
And what happened? What was the outcome?
The results were really significant. Interpol and its partners made hundreds of arrests, shut down tons of illegal websites selling fake vaccines, seized millions of dollars worth of counterfeit products.
Wow, that's impressive. It really shows how quickly Interpol can mobilize its global network to respond to these new threats.
Exactly. Operation Vax is a prime example of how Interpol's mandate goes beyond traditional crime fighting. It shows their commitment to safeguarding public health and safety in the face of these global challenges.
It highlights the real-world consequences of their work. It's not just about catching criminals. It's about preventing harm and, potentially saving lives.
Absolutely. And this is something that's often overlooked: Interpol's emphasis on international cooperation, information sharing. It has this ripple effect that goes way beyond law enforcement. It strengthens global security, builds trust between nations, and ultimately contributes to a safer, more stable world.
I couldn't agree more. And, for our listeners, especially those aspiring for the UPSC or those interested in international relations, understanding Interpol's role is so crucial. It provides a lens through which to understand the complexities of global governance and cooperation in the 21st century.
It goes beyond just memorizing facts for an exam. It's about understanding how the world really works and the mechanisms we have in place to address these transnational issues. Interpol is a perfect example of how international cooperation can actually produce results, in tackling challenges that no single country can solve on its own.
Now, Interpol has a history spanning over a century, but we're living in a world that's changing at an unprecedented pace. Technology is constantly evolving. Criminal tactics are becoming more sophisticated, and we're facing new threats like cybercrime and bioterrorism. How is Interpol adapting to this constantly shifting landscape? What does the future hold for this organization?
That's a great question, and one that Interpol is grappling with all the time. They're constantly evolving, adapting their strategies to stay ahead of the curve. Let's dive into that.
So we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Interpol. This has been a real eye-opener, to be honest. We've gone from the basics of how Interpol operates to really grasping its growing importance in dealing with these global challenges like cybercrime, terrorism, the works.
It's been a journey for sure. And what strikes me is just the sheer scale, the complexity of international police cooperation. It's not just about chasing bad guys across borders. It's a multi-layered thing, building relationships, sharing intel, navigating this whole web of different legal systems, cultures. It's a lot.
It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, where each piece is a different country with its own set of rules, its own way of doing things. It's a balancing act, right? You need to respect each country's sovereignty, but also foster this spirit of collaboration, of trust.
Absolutely. And that's where the real essence of Interpol's work lies, in creating this sense of shared responsibility for global security, recognizing that no one nation can tackle transnational crime alone. It's just not possible.
It takes a village, as they say. And this brings up an interesting point. Interpol doesn't actually have any enforcement power itself. It relies entirely on the willingness of its member countries to cooperate, to share information. It's almost like a global trust network.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why building those strong relationships, fostering that mutual trust, is so essential. It's about understanding that we're all in this together, that global security is everyone's responsibility.
A team effort, for sure. And I think that's a key takeaway for anyone listening, especially if you're thinking about a career in diplomacy, international relations, law enforcement. The future of global security depends on our ability to work together, to bridge those divides, to find common ground when we're facing shared threats.
Couldn't agree more. Organizations like Interpol, they provide the framework for that cooperation, a platform for dialogue, for action, leading the way toward a more secure and interconnected world.
Now, before we wrap things up completely, we should mention the challenges, the criticisms that Interpol faces. No organization is perfect, right? And Interpol has definitely had its share of scrutiny.
Of course. Every system has its limitations. Some people argue that Interpol can be slow to adapt to new threats, that the bureaucracy can sometimes slow things down, or that it could be susceptible to political influence from powerful member states.
Those are valid points. And these are things that Interpol is constantly working on, trying to address. It's a delicate balancing act, staying neutral, impartial, while also being responsive to the needs, the concerns of all its diverse members.
It's a constant evolution, a process of adaptation. And I think it's important to acknowledge those challenges, but also to recognize the immense value that Interpol brings to the table. It remains a vital tool for global security, and its role is only going to become more crucial in the years to come.
Absolutely. So as we conclude our deep dive into the world of Interpol, I want to leave you all with this thought. In a world where everything's connected, where threats ignore borders and criminals exploit those gaps in the system, organizations like Interpol are more important now than ever before.
They really embody humanity's capacity for cooperation, our ability to come together, face shared challenges, and work towards a safer, more just world for everyone.
Well said. And on that note, a huge thank you to our expert for joining us today, sharing your incredible insights. This has been a truly enlightening conversation.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Interpol. If you found it insightful, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon for more fascinating explorations into the issues that shape our world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.